Caught in the crossfire of a brutal conflict, indigenous Colombians vent their fury at both the government and FARC, demanding to be left alone. You're watching Inside Story Americas from Washington. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu and welcome to the show. First, it's been a momentous day in Syria after a bomb blast struck the National Security Building in Damascus during a meeting of cabinet ministers and senior security officials. This comes after a series of attacks in recent days in the capital. Syria's defense minister and interior minister were among the dead. Also killed was the deputy defense minister Assef, who was the brother-in-law of President Bashar al-Assad. The attack came as diplomatic maneuvers to seek a ceasefire remained deadlocked in the UN Security Council. Many analysts say today's events could represent a turning point in the conflict. But will it shift the debate in Washington? Earlier on Wednesday, the White House spokesman Jay Carney was asked about the latest developments.
We are seeing a situation that is getting worse and worse, and that is why it is so important for the international community to come together around a plan that produces the transition, the political transition that is essential if Syria is to have a brighter future. I think the incident today makes clear that Assad is losing control, that violence is increasing rather than decreasing.
One man who has written extensively on the Assad regime in Syria and who advised President Bush and continues to consult with President Obama on U.S.-Syrian relations is David Lesh, and he joins me now from San Antonio in Texas. David Lesh, thanks for joining us. When we look at the violence that is escalating there in Syria, what are the options that policymakers are facing in the State Department and perhaps in the White House as well?
Well, I think right now they're going to take a wait-and-see approach, as the administration spokesperson hinted to, especially in election year, and especially because they see, they like what they see. You know, that the regime, at least the perception, is that the regime is crumbling, that there are more defections, that the opposition opposition's reach is deeper and deeper into the inner sanctum of the regime. So I think they'll continue with what they have been doing, is offering political support, perhaps some tactical support to the Syrian opposition, and encouraging our allies, particularly Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, to provide more material support to the Syrian opposition. So I see them basically staying the course.
You know, when we listened to that news conference at the White House today, Jay Carney said that the window to a peaceful solution is closing. That's the view of the White House. What does that mean?
I think it means that the United States is trying to get the Russians to see the light, so to speak. They want the Russians to recognize that Assad's days are numbered, and that you will sink or swim, and you have to make a decision on that. And so they are going to maintain the pressure, the international pressure on the Russians, and to a lesser extent the Chinese, to get on board and to support a stronger UN Security Council resolution, and to work more assertively for a transition of power. So I think, you know, that window of opportunity is closing in terms of a diplomatic resolution that will bring about a relatively peaceful transition of power.
So if the major effort is going to be to get Russia and China on board at a very tough UN resolution, what would we see in that resolution that's going to try and perhaps force or persuade the Assad regime to step down?
Well, that's the big question, and that's one of the things I've been saying for a while, is even if Russia gets on board, there's no guarantee that President Bashar al-Assad and his circle of supporters are going to just, you know, lay down and accept anything that comes their way. They may continue to fight against any sort of resolution, because in their minds they're fighting for their lives, and I don't think they're going to feel protected by any UN resolution that may provide them some sort of exile and immunity from prosecution. So, you know, this resolution, no matter what it is, it's just a matter right now of getting the Russians on board and heaping on the diplomatic pressure and making Assad realize that there's no way out, and that the only way out is to take this one last opportunity to save yourself, save your family, and some other close supporters.
And I guess another big concern for the United States, even at this early stage, must be who takes over from Bashar al-Assad, because, you know, they didn't see what was coming in Libya, nor to some extent in Egypt right now, but they would want, of course, a regime to be there that would be sympathetic to U.S. interests on the one hand, I guess to Israel's interests as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a big question right now, is what would come should the Assad regime fall, especially should it precipitously fall anytime soon, creating a sort of vacuum of power. As we all know, the Syrian opposition is anything but a monolithic, unified bloc speaking with one voice. There are many different fault lines, which are very serious fault lines, which divide the Syrian opposition, and in a sectarian state,
right,
that if the center should fall, then you might have more civil strife as many different factions struggle for power. That's when the international community, in terms of funding and diplomatic support, really needs to weigh in. But I think that the United States, the international community as a whole, really need to work on the other side of the coin in terms of getting the Syrian opposition to speak with one voice and more unified to present a viable alternative which will get those remaining fence-sitters in Syria to leave Assad and come on the side of the opposition.
David Lesh, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Now to Colombia, where indigenous people in the southwestern region of Cauca say they've had enough of being caught in the middle of the country's long-running civil conflict. Their leaders are demanding government troops and members of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, known as FARC, go away and leave them in peace. The region has been the center of conflict for several years, and it's seen several violent incidents due to fighting between FARC and government troops. On Wednesday, they jeered President Juan Manuel Santos as he visited their war-ravaged region. But Santos told residents in the town of Toribio that he would not order the military to quit the 9 towns that the indigenous NASA community leaders want the military to vacate. The Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia has been fighting a succession of Colombian governments for nearly half a century. It says it's fighting for more equal distribution of land. Alessandro Rampietti went to see the protest near the town of Toribio.
We're on a mountaintop overlooking the town of Toribio in the Cauca region of Colombia. This is in the southwest of the country, and this region has been at the center of the Colombian conflict for over 40 years. The town of Toribio in particular has been hit over 500 times in the last 10 years. And when a fresh round of violence broke out again last week, killing 3 people, injuring dozens and destroying many homes, people decided to rebel. And they're rebelling against all armed groups in the region, both legal and illegal. The army, as you can see here behind me, and the FARC, the biggest rebel group in Colombia. Here you can see some of the devastation brought by the many attacks that hit Toribio in the last few years. Now, a decade ago, the central government militarized the area, positioning many soldiers outside and inside of town. And this, of course, brought many more attacks, and the people got caught in the crossfire. Now, the indigenous population think that this is their ancestral land, and this is recognized by the Colombian government. But this is also a FARC stronghold and a very important corridor for trafficking to the Pacific. So achieving what indigenous want to do, throwing out all the armed forces, will be extremely difficult. But they do think that this is their best hope for peace in 40 years.
So how likely is it that the indigenous community in Colombia will be successful in making the army and FARC leave their region? Joining us to discuss this, we have Virginia Bouvier, who's with the United States Institute of Peace. Also from Bogota, we have Bernardo Perez Salazar, who's a researcher of armed conflict and the peace process in Colombia. And Dana Brown is the executive director at the U.S. Office on Colombia. Welcome to all of you to the show. So we have widespread violence now. Thousands of people have been displaced. This is not a new phenomenon. Local indigenous people have been caught in the crossfire. They've had to move. Virginia, how long has this been going on?
Well, the struggle for the land in Cauca is a very old one. These are ancestral lands of both indigenous and Afro-Colombian communities. But I think more recently you've seen a number of events where the indigenous groups have been caught in the crossfire with both FARC attacking them and more recently military operations going on in that zone. And something, at some point the straw breaks the camel's back, and I think the groups have ordinarily been displaced from the region and have gone and tried to reestablish themselves elsewhere. It's been very difficult. Part of the indigenous culture is really linked to the land, so people are finally saying, we're going to stay on our lands, and not only are we going to stay on our lands, these are our lands and we don't want you here. So they've really given an ultimatum to both the FARC and the army that they should leave, that they don't rely on the state for their security, that they will provide their own security. Thank you very much. And so it's come to a bit of a confrontation, and it's very polarized right now.
Okay, well, let's listen to some of the grievances of the villagers, to the problems that they have. We talked with some of them, and this is what they had to say. Let's watch.
The
government policy is failing in our towns in the north of Cacao and in other parts of the country. The subversives are here, but since the military arrived, they haven't been fighting the guerrilla. It's the other way around. The guerrilla is fighting the army, and we are the ones dying.
Living here is very stressful. Our kids, our pregnant ladies, everybody really is psychologically affected by the situation. And the government doesn't see it. The state doesn't see it. We're surrounded by armed people while we're left demanding peace with our traditional sticks, which represents our autonomy.
We just want our land back. It's ours. We don't want to fight against the army, but they made our life impossible. We can't continue putting our head down. It's time to act, but in a peaceful way. We're just asking them to leave our sacred territory. We don't want them here anymore.
The voice there are some of the villagers in that particular area of Colombia, and we've just been hearing right now that one of the protesters has been killed in these clashes that are taking place in that area. Let's go to Bernardo Perez, who is in Bogota. Bernardo, these calls by the villagers for the army and for the FARC guerrillas to leave them alone, are they going to be heard?
Well, I don't really think so. There's, as Virginia mentioned, there's a lot of polarization around this issue right now, because of the fact that the government and the media, the mass media, are framing it as if the indigenous movement are being manipulated by the FARC so that they can do their thing, probably get a shipment of cocaine out on one of the corridors to the export area in the Pacific coast. So it's very polarized, and the indigenous movement has been indicating that during the past 2 years they've had confrontations permanently on their territories. The government has answered with successive increases in army and soldiers in the area. There's around 11,400 troops in the area right now, and that hasn't improved the situation. Instead, what the people feel is that it's increased the stress they're feeling, and the situation isn't getting any better. So what they're saying is, you can fight the FARC, and the FARC can fight the army on our territory, but please don't settle on our territory, because that is a major problem for us, because the FARC isn't fighting an open war. They're fighting using snipers. So soldiers and police are exposed to being shot at any time, and most of the time they're protecting themselves within military installations and police installations very close by civilian houses. Okay. And that is what has people on the brink of stress. So what they're saying is, listen, if you're going to fight, please fight them on our territory, but don't settle where we are settled, because that is increasing our exposure to violence.
Okay, Bernardo Perez, thank you. Diana Brown, actually, we're just hearing news right now that one person has been killed, 23 injured in those latest clashes. Now, as we heard there from Bernardo Perez, this particular area of Colombia is a gateway to the Pacific. It's a drug smuggling route. But what do we know about this area? I mean, is it of any strategic value to the FARC?
Well, I think it is of strategic value, and this area has been historically colonized or invaded by successive insurgent groups. Not only the FARC, but the ELN was there at a certain time in history. The Jaime Bateman, the Quintan Lame, the M19 in a certain moment. It's been a hotspot for an awful long time, and actually the community of Toribio, where the conflict is sort of centered right now, where the protests from this morning were, has been a victim to over 500 attacks in the last 30 years. 14 complete armed takeovers of the town. The police station has been destroyed 4 times in these attacks. It's been bombed. Just about a year ago today, there was a huge bombing by the FARC in the region. So this community has suffered a lot. And I think you can't underestimate the importance of what's happening right now, because one, it reveals the historic struggle of the indigenous communities for autonomy and self-determination and the rights to their land. It reminds us that the Colombian conflict has always been about land.
And the Constitution does provide for that, doesn't it? That people have some kind of autonomous rights in this land.
Yes, indigenous peoples have many rights under the Colombian Constitution, and one of the rights that they've been asserting lately is that the government has no right to expropriate the land for military or other use. Even in times of internal conflict, the Constitution says that it can expropriate it in international war. So I think one of the concerns of the community is that there's a violation of international humanitarian law in terms of the principle of distinction, because the army is occupying space in these towns that are where civilians live.
Yeah, do they have any kind of legal recourse at this stage?
I mean, I assume there are being petitions made to the Fiscalía, the Attorney General's office, and we'll see where that goes. But like I said, there's a history of all of the armed actors attacking these communities, and really it underlines the fact that the civilian population, and especially the most vulnerable of them, indigenous, Afro-Colombian, and campesinos, are those who suffer the brunt of the war disproportionately throughout Colombia.
Right. Well, let's listen to what the army has to say about it. This is Rodrigo Garcia, a sergeant in the Colombian army, who says that troops need to be in the region. Let's listen to what he says.
Nosotros tenemos que garantizar.
We are here to guarantee and protect the life and security of all the civil population in our nation. If we violate this rule, if we leave this territory, the community will be in the hands of the rebels. They will continue being active in this area. They will not leave, so the state will not leave.
Virginia, what does this fighting tell us about the FARC's strength in this area? Because, you know, we've often heard from the government, I mean, they have made significant gains against FARC, but FARC keeps coming back. So what does this tell us?
The FARC keeps coming back, and I think what we've seen in the last year is increasing numbers of attacks by the FARC. Some would speculate, ironically, that because there's more attacking now, it also is accompanied by a call for dialogue that came earlier. Right. And oftentimes when you have a peace process or the beginnings of talk about a peace process, each side wants to show that they're strong, and I think the FARC has good reason to show that they're still a force to be reckoned with, and if they're the ones that are calling for dialogue or asking the government to talk to them, and they want the government to listen to that plea, showing a force of strength somewhere is a good tactic. I mean, it's a tried and true tactic to get a government to listen to you. I mean, people listen to violence, unfortunately. The media listens to violence, and I think that's another theme as well in terms of the media coverage.
Let me ask that question of Bernardo Perez. Is this a case where the FARC wants to negotiate from a point of strength, from a place of strength? Because, you know, what it's doing is carrying out these attacks and at the same time saying, well, we want dialogue with the government.
Right. They definitely don't want to come to a negotiation table being defeated. And this particular area of Colombia has a lot of advantages, gives them a lot of military advantages. They're on the slope of one of the main summits of Colombia, that's El Nevado del Huila. That's a snow-capped volcano that's about 5,750 meters above sea level. And that's a traditional FARC territory, the first independent republics where self-defense peasants organized the seeds of FARC, of present-day FARC, are very close by, well, something like 100 kilometers from the area. So this is an area where they have moved for a lot of time, for 50 years. They have a social base there. They know the area well. It has a heavy cloud cover, so the advantage that the army has with the Super Tucanos, the aircrafts that give them airborne firepower, is neutralized, and FARC has innovated a lot of tactics to harass and bring deaths to the military in this area. And so that's the ideal scenario for them, to show that they're not defeated and that they will have to be reckoned, as Virginia was mentioning. And I think that's a very difficult position for President Santos, because he has ex-President Uribe breathing on his neck, saying that he doesn't have the wherewithal to lead the defeat of the FARC. And I don't think Mr. Uribe would either. And the fact that the indigenous movement at this point in time is standing up both to the government and to the FARC puts him in a very difficult position, because it makes him look weak.
Yeah,
and of course he won't want to come to a negotiation table appearing weak either.
Yeah, the indigenous people are caught in the middle, and of course he's talking tough, President Santos, because he's already said that the government will not cede 1 centimeter of ground to the FARC. Dana, earlier on you gave us some idea of the legal position concerning these villages down there. But I would imagine that the most important obligation that the government has is to protect its own people.
Absolutely, and I wanted to comment on what the Army representative had said. It's absolutely the responsibility of the Colombian government to protect the civilian population. But as we've seen by the thousands of displacements, there have been about a dozen forced disappearances during these clashes as well. This morning, the 3rd Division of the Army was responsible for an accidental killing of an indigenous man in Caldono, which is another part of Cauca department away from Toribio, where the recent clashes have been. And subsequently, the head of the 3rd Division of the Army was let go because of this action. Given this context, I don't think we can say that the Colombian government is protecting the civilian population right now. And I think you also have to understand why civilian populations might not trust that the army presence in their towns makes them more safe, because they're experiencing an uptick in violence right now. But also the history of the Colombian army is that they're responsible for over 3,000 extrajudicial killings, numerous forced displacements, forced disappearances. It's the highest rate of internal displacement in the entire world, and many of these crimes remain in impunity right now. So it's understandable why a community would not think that the presence of armed actors in their community makes them any safer, no matter if the armed actors are legal or illegal.
Yeah, and there was an attempt by former President Alvaro Uribe to almost co-opt the local villages when he set up this peasant army program, to provide intelligence to the military. Does that still function? Is that still going on, Virginia?
Well, I think there is less of an effort for that particular peasant soldier campaign that Uribe had right now. But I think the polarized "you're with us or against us" that was really the dominant tone under Uribe has changed somewhat. However, Santos is taking a pretty strong stance here, and he's not coming in and saying, let's dialogue about it. Why do you feel less secure when the military and police are here? Which I think is the logical starting point. Right. Clearly, the people in these communities feel that the military and police are not protecting them. And so you have to start looking at the question of security. What is security here? What provides security? Does militarization make people more secure? And I think you could argue that no, it doesn't. In fact, for these people, and for many communities throughout Colombia who declare themselves as peace communities and say, we don't want any armed actors, including the government, to be here because they feel that it's more prejudicial to their well-being to have militarized forces around them. I think you have to start asking whether there are some there's some other way to look at security, and there are ways to increase or decrease the likelihood that populations will be vulnerable to violence.
We're going to have to leave it there because we've run out of time. Dana Brown, Virginia Bouvier, and Bernardo Perez Salazar, thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
And that is it from the team here in Washington, D.C. for now. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, where you can find more information about the program. And of course, we want to hear from you. Tell us what stories you think we should be covering. Send your ideas directly to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching.